22. George S. Counts. Who shall control education? A vice principal once declared that the law of writing in educational studies is in essence simply this: never state in a sentence what can be said in a paragraph, nor in a paragraph what can be said in a chapter, nor in a chapter what can be said in a book. There is an unhappy element of truth in this, and not only among professors of education, be it added. A clear-cut exception to this is to be found in George S. Counts, born 1889, one of the most dedicated of recent educators. The influence of Counts has been great, but that it has not been greater is no tribute to most educators who in principle share certain common assumptions with Counts but do not equal him in his intelligent and unflinching application of them. It is easy to differ with Counts, but no careful reading of him can lead to other than a recognition of his integrity and his intelligence, as well as his awareness of at least a few of the problems inherent in his position. Counts is well known for his insistence that a new social order, a planned economy, must be built, and that the schools must help build it. What is the nature of that order as Counts has seen it? Like other educators after Dewey, Counts has not seen history as bound by law, and hence, with them, refused to recognize the validity of economics. History, accordingly, has been made by such thinkers merely man's struggle against the tyranny of law and of anti-democratic powers. The goal of history is, for both Marxist and pragmatist, the abolition of history. Molnar and Kirk have called attention to Dewey's hostility to the inner life. For Dewey, in Democracy and Education, the inner man is a socially divisive concept and denotes that which is not capable of free and full communication, and spiritual culture has usually been futile with something rotten about it, just because it has been conceived as a thing which a man might have internally, and therefore exclusively. As Kirk has commented, the drift of such thinking is the creation of an impersonal society, and Dewey's education for democracy may become education for tyranny. Such an outcome is inevitable. If the universe is ultimately and essentially impersonal, then man and his society are at their highest developments when most impersonal. But if the universe has its creation at the hands of a highly and totally self-conscious God, then man and society are at their best when most personal. Modern education is in large measure a schooling for impersonality and the submergence of the person into the impersonal group. With intelligence tests, the more depersonalized the tests, the more they are supposed to identify talent and dictate vocational and professional orientation. The break with the past that characterizes education since Dewey is not only a break with law and history, but a break with personality. It is a faith that the future of man rests not in his inner character, but on his outward circumstances, the form of his society in particular. In Molnar's words, thus a social gospel and technological method were combined in one simple statement: from our material well-being, a new man and a better society will arise. This, of course, was precisely the program proposed to Jesus in the temptation, but as a subcommittee of the House of Representatives has pointed out, the average delinquent is considerably more socialized than his non-delinquent contemporaries. It is partly through his group interests and activities that he gets into trouble in the first place. All this is relevant to Counts, who, like Washburn, has spent little or no time in criticism of earlier educators and has been sensitive to at least some of the dangers of his concept of democracy. A brief summary of the development of Coates' concept of the role of education and its problems is necessary in order to see his awareness of the developing problems. Loyal to Dewey, he went far beyond Dewey. A champion of the impersonal society, he also feared it. Counts, as a follower of Dewey and a champion of democracy, was early concerned with the selective character of American secondary education, 1922. The high school, he believed, because of its academic and scholastic emphasis, had given education for the selected few, whether by birth or by talent, instead of the education into adolescence and into political democracy, which some educators desired. Immediately, a characteristic note of the new education becomes apparent. Intellectualism is aristocratic, and a scholastic emphasis anti-democratic, even though it be available to all who are capable. No such prejudice against art, for example, was manifested, although artistic ability is, like high intellectual aptitude, not the common possession of all students. Somehow, as many educators saw it, the mind is particularly divisive. This common fallacy Counts avoided. His approach was from the standpoint of taxes and their use in a democracy. Secondary education, made possible by the taxation of all, was serving the selective few and thus doubly undemocratic, both in its use of funds and by its limited student body. Counts, thus, was far from being anti-intellectualistic, as were some of his colleagues. It was his concern in 1922 and always to put the high school at the service of every class without distinction and, at the same time, render the largest service to the entire community. Counts's position then, from his earlier years, had a different emphasis than was prevalent in certain quarters. His premise was the tax structure of the schools, which taxed all. The tax funds could therefore not be used to educate the few, as the academic high school did, but must educate all classes, providing for the needs of every caliber of student, as well as the needs of society. For the intelligent, an academic program is excellent. For others, a more practical kind of training is necessary and desirable. For Counts, education as a social process is nothing more than an economical method of assisting an initially ill-adapted individual during the short period of a single life to cope with the ever-increasing complexities of the world. Thus, education is a differing process from person to person in terms of their abilities and goals. The school is a purified environment designed to lead to the purification of our present social, industrial, and political order. This advantageous environment of this school cannot be unduly prolonged or overdone, lest prolonged guardianship foster social parasitism. Such parasitism comes in rich or poor when they are reared in a system which satisfies their wants without requiring service in return. The postponement of marriage through prolonged immaturity is a second evil of prolonged guardianship. And yet, in spite of this remarkable emphasis, courts could at the same time, 1924, declare that our educational program must recognize the distribution of income as equal in importance to production itself. The guardianship courts feared in these schools. He was ready, in allegiance to Dewey's great society, to impose on the people at large in the name of democracy. On the other hand, his concept of education was very early, more religiously oriented than most, in that he recognized the fundamentally religious nature of education, a recognition his later studies of Russian education underscored. Thus, the elementary school would seek to further health, promote the family life, order and humanize the economic life, advance the civic life, enrich the recreational life, and foster the religious life. Nothing is said about teaching the child to read, an omission somewhat surprising in Counts. The high school must become, for Counts, the People's University, the central agency through which the ideal America may be brought into the world of reality. The college should train the leaders of the great society. The teacher thus has a unique position in controlling the evolution of society and in exercising a regenerating influence. Counts returned, as he often did, to the subject of the support and control of the schools. Tax support is justifiable in a democracy where all give and all receive equally, and where education is selective, it is to prepare the few for the good of all. However, local control of schools sometimes leads to control by powerful minorities. On the other hand, the interests of the state are not always or necessarily good and can endanger education. To the writers, there seem to be three ways in which the educational interest must be safeguarded against the undue interference of the state. First, practically complete freedom should be given to private initiative in the promotion of different forms of educational enterprise. Second, the centralization of educational control in the hands of federal authorities should be extremely carefully watched and, in our opinion, vigorously opposed. And third, wide liberty of action, especially on the upper levels of the educational system, should be guaranteed the teacher in the discharge of his task. Thus, Counts was very early both an advocate of practically complete freedom for private education and fearful of state and especially federal control. In the senior high school curriculum, Counts called attention to the changes towards the new education in current secondary education. In the social composition of boards of education, a study in the social control of public education, 1927, Counts called attention to the non-democratic nature of most school boards, failing as they did to represent the worker and minority groups. Counts cited an American Federation of Labor recommendation concerning this proposed amendment to state educational law, that a state board of education is hereby created to consist of 5 members to be appointed from the state at large, 2 members to be representatives of education, 1 to be a representative of the manufacturing and commercial interests, 1 a representative of the agricultural interests, and 1 a representative of labor. The governor shall appoint the members of the board for a term of 5 years. Counts felt that other interests also should be recognized, but that some such provision should be made. The implications here are far-reaching. In the name of democracy, class differences are written into society and made permanent. No man is seen as capable of representing anything other than his environment. The farmer is thus always and only a farmer, and the negro permanently a negro. The more democracy tries to equalize classes, the more it emphasizes and creates classes and castes, and democratic society becomes caste society and status-conscious society. The state, as the social arbiter, becomes man's all in all. Thus, education is one of the highest forms of statesmanship. The educator working in the public schools is a servant of the state. A managed economy is necessary and perhaps socialized medicine as well. The great purpose of the public school, therefore, should be to prepare the coming generation to participate actively and courageously in building a democratic industrial society that will cooperate with other nations in the exchange of goods, in the cultivation of the arts, in the advancement of knowledge and thought, and in maintaining the peace of the world. A less Catholic purpose would be certain, sooner or later, to lead the country to disaster. In view of this, when all else is managed and socialized, how can the schools escape the same fate? Counts believed that schools and educational movements should have a solid social foundation. How can they have such a grassroots foundation when controlled from the top? As Kuntz himself saw, the Soviet Russian schools have faced very squarely such questions as the purpose of education, the relation of education to society, the role of science in the study of education, the place of the school among the educational agencies, and the function of education in the evolution of culture. Such an answer can come very neatly, but not necessarily ably or accurately from a centralized authority, one which Kuntz feared. But can a managed society do other than produce a managed school? For Finkovich, by social education, we mean that education which aims to develop man first as a member of society and then as an individual. Thus, the individual is to be subordinated to the mass, and more than that, to be manure for the future, according to Finkovich. The idea of social education and social pedagogy, in its most general form, was formulated by Kant, who, in his lectures on pedagogy, expressed, among other things, the following thought: children must be trained not for the present but for the future improvement of the human race, and in accordance with some conception of the destiny of mankind. If morality is completely non-supernatural and man-centered, then it must serve not the insignificant individual, but the whole, the state or world order, as Lenin is on the right track in declaring. We say that our morality is entirely subservient to the interests of the class struggle of the proletariat. The Soviet Russians, thus, are more consistent than Kuntz. A managed society means a managed school in terms of a social morality which must subordinate the individual to the group. How could Kuntz's educator, a servant of the state, in his own words, hope for a liberty which the state denies to all other orders? How can democracy, in eliminating differences, escape destroying the liberty which creates differences? Kuntz, always strongly hostile to Soviet Russian dictatorship, espoused democracy in the hope that it means freedom for the common man. But the common man, the people as a whole, do not possess the revolutionary spirit of their ancestors, and as a result they will not make the schools the force for social change which it should be. The schools simply reflect the culture of the day, which can be analysed into 10 principles. They may be styled the principle of faith in education, the principle of governmental responsibility, the principle of local initiative, the principle of individual success, the principle of democracy, the principle of national solidarity, the principle of social conformity, the principle of mechanical efficiency, the principle of practical utility, and the principle of philosophic uncertainty. Together with this, there is a Messianic expectation of the school. Education is identified with the work of the school. As a consequence, the faith in education becomes a faith in the school, and the school is looked upon as a worker of miracles. In fact, the school is the American road to culture. The people will not act. It is dangerous for the state to assume the prerogative of action. Who then should act? The schools, the teachers, hence the challenge in 1932. Dare the schools build a new social order? The schools must redeem society, and society is never redeemed without effort, struggle, and sacrifice. Progressive education has elaborated no theory of social welfare unless it be that of anarchy or extreme individualism. Education cannot escape dealing with the issues of life, hence social welfare, religion, morality. Every important issue is inextricably tied up with education, and some kind of indoctrination is inevitable. It must be recognized as always present and necessary, must be conducted in truth and honesty, with distortion and suppression of facts avoided. I am prepared to defend the thesis that all education contains a large element of imposition, that in the very nature of the case this is inevitable, that the existence and evolution of society depend upon it, that it is consequently eminently desirable and that the frank acceptance of this fact by the educator is a major professional obligation. This pamphlet, by counts, has been frequently cited as a manifesto for a planned economy. This element was clearly present. Society, Counts held, is moving from a political to an economic democracy, and the schools must help create that new order. The machine and industry must be socially owned, and capitalism must be recognized as dead. Democracy means the moral equality of men and the repression of every form of privilege and economic parasitism. It must manifest a tender regard for the weak, the ignorant, and the unfortunate, place the heavier and more onerous social burdens on the back of the strong, and seek the triumph of man in equality of opportunity. It must direct the powers of government to the elevation and the refinement of the life of the common man, and destroy all special privileges, and must resort to revolution if necessary. This is, of course, in large measure, the subsidy, special privilege and social parasitism of the weak on the strong, which has come into being since 1932. The radical element in Dare the Schools Build a New Social Order was neither political nor economic, containing as it did nothing not previously held by counts in these spheres or shared by others, but was religious and philosophical. Counts broke radically with the modern conception of autonomous man who, in his autonomy, is capable of objectivity and impartiality. The whole myth of scientific and modern man was sharply shattered in Counts's unflinching rejection of the pure and objective reason as educator. Education was inevitably imposition to a large measure, and the impossibility of impartiality made the frank acceptance of partiality a necessary means to truth and a major professional obligation. At this point, Counts met the vulnerability of Western humanist education before the Marxist, fascist, and Nazi educational onslaughts that were already beginning to mount. These new tyrannies had seen the absurdity and impossibility of the old ideal of objectivity. Their answer was to make the state the only organ of objectivity, as alone capable of transcending personality and hence subjectivity. As a result, they turned from one fallacy only to plunge into another. Counts rejected the first. His problem was how to avoid the second and make personal humility and self-recognition of partiality as itself the ground of reaching truth. Counts, as a result, broke at the one and same time from the anarchism of progressive education, the old humanistic myth of objectivity, capitalism and the state as the new order of truth. This left him in the precarious position of espousing a statist and managed economy while fearing the state's claim to be the vehicle of truth. For the biblically consistent Christian, God is both the source of the order of life and the order of truth. For Counts, the state had become the order of life, but contradictorily, he feared it and sometimes fought it as the order of truth. The two orders, however, remain as the two faces of a common coin. Somehow, Counts hoped the teachers would strike a balance and become the saving factor. Teachers are at the same time the loyal servants and the spiritual leaders of the masses of the people. The teacher must become the cultural agent. Above all, the teacher is a bearer of culture and a creator of social values. The need, therefore, is for a training of great breadth and depth. The teacher's college, to be worthy of the name, should be a centre of truly liberal education. The emphasis on methodology should be secondary, the emphasis on ideas and understanding primary. Education itself should be recognised not as an independent and universal technique, but as an inseparable aspect of a particular culture and evolution. Here again, but more mildly stated, is a denial of the independence of education from subjectivity and partiality. It is a representative of and an aspect of a culture and a faith in process of evolution. If no more than this, why not accept the totalitarian and medieval subservience of education to a superior institution or order as the true voice and vehicle of that culture? Counts's hope for order was social democracy and the democratic states and the world. Why should the school be anything more than an instrument of that order? Counts knew the potential dangers in democracy. He favoured a managed economy because he believed that technology has made old conceptions and practices obsolete. On the other hand, he recognised that it is not impossible that the American people might be led into the camp of dictatorship flying the flag of democracy. Hence, it was necessary to organise the masses as completely as possible, as though organisation would preserve liberty. If free institutions are to be preserved and employed in social reform, the people must capture the state. Hence, the organisation of the people as producers, consumers, and citizens should be promoted on the broadest possible basis. But might this not array class against class, and hence destroy the unity of the nation? But this should arouse anxiety in no real friend of democracy. But with modern technology, is mass man the power, or is it the man or state that controls the machines? Who is the true power? Can it be that democracy will retreat as it advanced with the infantry? Counts's hope is that vigilance will prevent this eventuality by assuring government a complete monopoly of the police and military power. This only compounds the problem, however, rather than solves it. Counts contradictorily trusted the concentration of economic power and control in the hands of the state, but doubted at times the state's trustworthiness to control education to the same degree. Who shall control education? Counts recognized that, in the past, the American aristocracy did not govern education merely in terms of class interest, but in terms of faith in popular government, in the potentiality of common people, in the wisdom of the free play of reason, and in the indefinite perfectibility of man and human institutions. In short, the quote-unquote aristocracy govern in terms of a faith shared with the common man. Every educational program embraces the apparently logically contradictory process of moulding and enlightenment. There must be a balance between the two which statism destroys. Education, without presuming to shape the entire social process, should accept its share of responsibility for the reconstruction of society. To be guided in terms of its full responsibility and to avoid becoming a mere tool, two closely related conditions must be achieved. Education must attain a relative measure of independence of the state and escape the domination of the contemporary aristocracy. The teacher's deepest loyalty cannot be statist. The teacher must be the representative of a broad democratic faith, that is, his role is inevitably religious. Thus, the state must triumph in every area except one, the school, which is man's new church, and the teacher his new clergy, who must be kept free of state control while on state support. Counts failed to pursue his thinking past this point. Beginning with World War II, fear of world despotism made him overlook certain issues in terms of a call to arms. On the other hand, his conception of the religious nature of education remains unchanged. A truly great education must express a truly great conception of life. He recognized that the contemporary dictatorships have demonstrated the political dangers inherent in a highly centralized system of educational control. Some solution to the problem must be sought. Counts's solution, strangely, included what he once decried, namely, federal aids to education. It involved, moreover, a National Emergency Educational Board of tentatively 11 members, 5 to be educators. Another 5 would be drawn from each of the following 5 groups of the American community: businessmen, industrial workers, farmers, Negroes, and youth. The 11th should be a great national figure familiar with the many facets of our complicated life. As a further goal, an international board of education was proposed. The 5 educators would seemingly protect the independence of education, but how independent would any state selected and appointed men be? And would not the board ensure a permanent caste and class system, with Negroes, for example, always subject to representation as Negroes and not as men and citizens at large? And how could the school transcend the state if the state and civilization are made identical by the concentration of control into the hands of the state? As Counts insisted, education is always a function of some particular civilization at some particular time in history. If civilization and the states are made identical, education and religion also become identical with the state. Counts's passionate hope for educational freedom was in contradiction to his statism. From his studies in Soviet Russian pedagogy, Counts saw Russian education to be education in communist morality, or education in the qualities of Bolshevik character. When the state knows no law beyond itself, whether that law be communism or democracy, the state, in controlling the schools, will make its goals and morals the goals and morals of the children. It knows no other law. Counts criticized progressive educators for holding to anarchistic individualism and the Great Society at one and the same time. Counts was guilty of the same sin. His teachers in schools were to have an independence denied to all others in the name of the Great Society. Counts continued to call attention to the dangers inherent in the Soviet Russian system. He could warn of tyranny, stating, "1984 may be closer than you think," but he continued to believe that somehow education could escape management and control in an increasingly managed and controlled society. In respect to Counts, however, it must be recognized that he saw issues and problems which many educators fail to see or deal with. There was in Counts not only a dedication to statism, but a dedication to liberty which made this awareness possible.